the History Channel original podcast.
History This Week, July 7th, 1938. I'm Sally Helm. Washington, D.C. Inside a tall apartment building with big glass windows, two men are deep in conversation. Something is up. The first is a slick lobbyist. Black bowler hat, burgundy suit, a tidy mustache. This is Alex Greer. He's talking to U.S. Senator Barrows. More than talking, really. Bribing. Greer wants the senator to support a bill, one that will lead the U.S. to war with Europe. And Senator Barrows promises the bill will pass and make them both very, very rich. And then a man appears. He cuts a striking figure, dark hair, bulging muscles, and he's not dressed for Washington, D.C. In fact, he is wearing tights and a cape, and a skin-tight shirt emblazoned with a giant S. He demands to know who Greer is working for. When Greer won't say, Superman grabs him by the foot and whisks him out the window and into the air. All that was in the first ever installment of the story of Superman, published earlier in 1938. And now, in July 1938, the new installment is here. This is the Superman comic that kids are picking up at newsstands and reading by flashlight in bed or while lounging at the community pool. It picks up right where the first installment left off, with Greer and Superman flying through the air. They hit the sidewalk so hard it breaks into pieces, and Greer gives in. His boss is the scheming munitions manufacturer Emil Norvell, who's hell-bent on starting a war. Superman has the information he needs. He leaves Greer behind, flies to the top of the Washington Monument, and goes in search of Norvell. Superman has only had these 2 appearances in print, but it's already clear bad guys aren't safe when he's around. He is quickly becoming a household name. Today, the creation of Superman. How did 2 friends in Cleveland, Ohio invent an icon? And how did he slip from their grasp? October 1929. The stock market has just crashed. The whole country is on edge. This is the start of the Great Depression. But Jerry Siegel has other things on his mind. It's his first year at Glenville High School, and he urgently, desperately wants to find his place. Siegel is short, has a lot of energy. He's the youngest of 6 kids from a working-class Jewish family.
I say this with all the respect and power that it deserves, but Jerry was a nerd. That's what he was, and I think that was his power, too.
That's Brad Ricca, author of Superboys, a book about the invention of Superman. He told us Jerry Siegel has no interest in sports. He has a major, but largely unreciprocated, interest in girls. And more than anything, Jerry, like so many of us, just wants to be seen and understood. Also, maybe, if he's lucky, he wants to be a little famous. Glenville High could be his big break, if he plays his cards right.
For so many kids in the 30s, high school was it. You know, you weren't going to college. So these big high schools kind of became these mini colleges. They had all these clubs and people dressed up and wore ties and dresses.
Glenville High is one of those mini colleges. It has dozens of clubs, one of which in particular catches Jerry Siegel's eye.
He really liked the newspaper, which was the Glenville Torch.
The Torch comes out every week. And Jerry reads every issue. He wants to be a part of it. And one day, he gets his chance. The Torch is holding their annual literary contest. The winning story will be printed in the paper. For Siegel, this is perfect because more than anything in the world, maybe even more than girls, he loves stories.
Not even the nice stories that you would read in school, but science fiction stories that you would buy in these magazines that he was probably too young to be reading anyway.
Jerry submits a story to the Torch, a pulpy sci-fi tale. And then, every day, for weeks, he opens the paper with bated breath, waiting for the result. On May 29th, 1930, there it is. His name, his story, in black and white. He hadn't actually won the contest, but the Torch liked his story enough to print it anyways. This is the beginning of Siegel's extremely prolific career at the Glenville Torch. He writes all sorts of things: science fiction, detective stories, humor, even the occasional poem for a girl.
He just took off. And some of it's really student writing, I think is the nice way to put it. But it's really great, too, because you can see him just finding his voice.
Writing becomes Siegel's obsession, to the extent that his grades suffer, his teachers worry. But he doesn't care. He's found his calling. And then, one day, at school, he finds his creative partner. He finds Joe Shuster. Like Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster is short, Jewish, working class, but most importantly, he is also a nerd.
Joe really liked science fiction, and they became friends.
No one else Siegel knew was into the weird science fiction stories that he was. Nerddom at this point was still rare. But now, here was Shuster at his high school. It was like a miracle. For all they have in common, Shuster is also different from Siegel. He's shy, almost painfully so, self-conscious, obsessed with powerlifting and trying to bulk up.
And so he, would send away for these physical fitness courses and would drink raw eggs and work out all the time, but it made no difference.
He also isn't into writing. What Joe Shuster likes is drawing.
He loved cartoons and he drew on everything he could find.
He's good. Everyone thinks so.
He entered a cartoon contest and it went on the front page of the Torch.
And Siegel sees an opportunity.
Here's this friend of mine who's drawing and it's really good and people like it. Maybe we should collaborate.
They start with short stories, genre fiction with eye-popping illustrations. First for the Torch, then as submissions for the science fiction and detective magazines that they're both into. They're always rejected, which is frustrating, but they love the work. In 1932, when Jerry is 17, tragedy strikes the Siegel family. One evening in June, Jerry's father is ending his day at work.
He worked in a secondhand clothing store and closing up one night, 2 or 3 men walk in and they try and steal a suit of clothes.
It's raining, storming, really, and Jerry's father is frightened.
He thinks there might be a gun.
Still, he tries to stop them.
But he can't because he falls over dead of a heart attack.
Jerry Siegel doesn't talk much about his father's death to Joe Shuster or anyone else. Instead, he writes and writes and writes. His mother hears his typewriter clacking late into the night. Siegel's passion is hardening into real ambition. He's now the last man in his household. He wants to become a serious professional. He just needs a great idea. And then, one summer night, he has one. The story of Superman's creation is legend, myth, really. Jerry Siegel always tells it like this. It's a hot night and he can't sleep. He's tossing and turning in his bed. And then he has an epiphany.
There's Superman all of a sudden.
Superman appears to him as if in a vision. He writes all night. At dawn, he runs to Joe's house. Joe opens the door, bleary-eyed. Jerry is so excited he can barely get the words out. But when he finally does, Joe gets it. He starts drawing right there on a paper tacked to a breadboard in his mother's kitchen. Superman is born. Maybe it really happened exactly like this. Or maybe it didn't. We do know that Siegel and Shuster start refining the story of this super strong hero who can run fast and lift things and get bad guys, but who lives life as if he's a normal person. The journalist Clark Kent. They draw elements from their environment. Tights from the powerlifters Shuster loved. Super speed from Cleveland legend Jesse Owens. Hair seemingly plucked from the head of a local football hero. And then, of course, there's the death of Jerry's dad, woven into the story. Superman gives Jerry the chance to change the ending. In this world, if the bad guys show up at the secondhand store on a stormy night, they won't get away with it. Superman will be there.
This was not a story to be made just for money, just to be famous, just to impress girls. This was autobiography. And if it's autobiography, if you're trying to make a statement about the world through this medium, then it's art.
Siegel and Shuster know that they have something here, so they send it out to all the magazines they love. And they're rejected, over and over again. Something is missing. They need a girl, a love interest. They need Lois Lane. And very soon, they'll meet her in real life. Across town from Joe and Jerry, on the west side of Cleveland, there lives a girl named Yolan Kovach. Her family life isn't great, and like Jerry and Joe, she's ambitious.
She really wants to get out of Cleveland. She really wants to make something of herself.
So Kovach makes a plan.
She puts an ad in the Plain Dealer to be a model. And she puts it in for one day.
In that one day, she gets a lot of responses. Requests for dates, a few marriage proposals, some truly filthy letters. But one note stands out. It's from a Mr. Shuster, asking her to model for his drawings. Kovach likes cartoons. Mr. Shuster seems nice. And Kovach has the rashness of a teenager. So, a few weeks later, she finds herself across town, knocking at Mr. Shuster's front door.
And she was freezing cold, and she's all bundled up, and she's totally thinking, I should not be here. And Joe answers the door, and he's this kid. And she's like, can I talk to Joe Shuster?
Joe pauses for a moment, blushing.
And he's like, I am Joe Shuster. And she knew it was going to be fine.
Shuster draws Kovach for hours under his mother's supervision. And when he's done, there she is, Lois Lane.
She shows up in all the comics and looks exactly like those first drawings.
Kovach and Shuster actually end up dating for a while. But pretty soon, she does what she's always set out to do. She leaves Cleveland. She becomes a model in New York and steps out of Joe and Jerry's life. For the moment, at least. In 1935, after years of submissions and rejections, 20-year-old Siegel and Shuster finally get their big break. They're actually hired to write comics. It's not Superman, and they aren't paid much, but it's finally happened. They are officially comic book professionals.
They thought they were the big time. You know, they were getting checks and, hey, Ma, you know, look, I'm a comics artist now.
But even as Siegel and Shuster settle into their grown-up job, they never give up on Superman. They submit him to newspapers and magazines for 7 years. And over, they're rejected.
Rejection letters that are so bad. They're like, this art is immature. Have you considered being a plumber? But they don't change anything because they know it's good.
And then, one Monday in January, they get a letter. There's been a shakeup behind the scenes at the company they work for. That company, called National, it wants to publish Superman. This is another part of the story that's steeped in myth and legend.
So there's like so many stories about how it gets discovered. And the reality is we don't know why.
Some say it was luck, that Superman just finally gets noticed in the slush pile. Brad Ricca thinks it was a calculated play by that company, National. It had just lost the rights to the Lone Ranger. Maybe you know him, a fictional masked ranger who caught outlaws in the Wild West.
He was what we would call today a transmedia property. You could make money on the Lone Ranger in radio, in magazines, in short stories, books, you name it.
They were looking for a replacement, something that could be bigger than comics. And they saw that in Superman. But Siegel and Shuster, they're not thinking about franchising. They're just excited. This is the moment they've been waiting for 7 years. And when the contract arrives from National, they sign it, just like that. And then they realize they've made a big mistake. Siegel and Shuster's contract with National is now infamous.
They were paid $10 a page for $130.
Not only that, the contract includes this.
This is the non-legal version, but you will relinquish the rights. You walk away and you own nothing.
National owns Superman, not Jerry and Joe.
So the big question is, did they know that was going to happen? I think they didn't know, which makes it in some ways kind of more difficult to digest.
What we know for sure is that within weeks of Superman's publication, Siegel and Shuster try to get the rights back. But it's too late.
It was a contract, and a contract is a contract is a contract.
After almost a decade, Superman is finally flying out into the world, but he's no longer Siegel and Shuster's. He belongs to National. The first issue of Superman comes out in Action Comics 1 on April 18th, 1938.
And there's other stories in there about like cowboys and you name it, but there's only one superhero. And Superman's on the cover.
That cover is iconic. Shuster draws Superman lifting up a mangled green car. All around him are grown men running away, terrified. When the comic hits the stands, it's a sensation, a runaway hit. Nobody has ever seen a superhero in a cape and tights before, and kids buy it in droves. So National doubles down. They want as much Superman as Siegel and Shuster can give them. Siegel and Shuster are still furious with the company, but even though they sold the rights for a pittance, they are making decent money to write and draw new issues of the comic, and they do love working on Superman, seeing their childhood dream fulfilled. So they roll up their sleeves and crank out issue after issue. They get office space. They hire more artists.
They had their little workshop going, and it seems like really awesome. They bought new houses, and they moved to newer suburbs. Jerry got married. Joe bought a car. And they were what I call Cleveland famous, where they were famous in Cleveland, but nowhere else.
Siegel and Shuster are thriving. But then, one December morning, thousands of miles away, Japanese fighter planes appear in the skies over Oahu. Bombs start dropping. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. Thousands die, and everything changes.
Pearl Harbor changes everything for everyone living in the country. So, of course, it changes their lives. And it definitely changes Superman's life, too.
Siegel and Shuster sign up to enlist. Joe is rejected from the Army, weak eyes. But Jerry is drafted, sent to Honolulu. And Superman
continues, but it's not really continuing with them as much.
Superman now has a life of his own. A team of writers and illustrators who can conjure him up without Siegel and Shuster. The further Jerry gets from Superman, the more it hurts. And then he sees something that really gets him. A new comic from National, Superboy.
It was The Adventures of Superman as a Boy. He had pitched it years ago.
National had rejected it, but now they're putting it out.
And they didn't ask him. They didn't ask his permission.
Even worse, the artist is Joe Shuster. He'd gone ahead and done it without telling Jerry. And Jerry feels betrayed.
It caused like a real rift there.
In 1945, the war ends. Jerry Siegel returns to Cleveland.
But everything's different, like it was for everybody.
Siegel tries to step back into his old life, but he can't quite. His marriage starts to fall apart. Within a few years, he'll get divorced. Meanwhile, superheroes are bigger than ever. There are comic books, but also radio plays, cartoons shown in movie theaters. None of this would exist without him, but Jerry is on the outside. He and Joe have been patching things up, and in April of 1947, they team up against National. They sue for $5 million and the rights to Superman and Superboy. After weeks in court, the ruling comes down. Siegel and Shuster are awarded the rights to Superboy.
A contract is a contract.
It's Superman they wanted, but he belongs to National.
And they were told by the courts, they were told by their lawyers, there's nothing you can do.
And then another blow.
When they sued for the rights, they were both fired. And that's like kind of the beginning of the kind of lost time for them.
About 6 months later, in the spring of 1948, Jerry Siegel finds himself in New York at the Waldorf Astoria, attending the cartoonists' ball.
Very famous, it's a masquerade ball, like a costume ball.
It's a very festive event. There are rumors that Marlon Brando is going to appear to judge the costume contest, but Siegel is feeling down. He and Shuster have been trying to get back on their feet.
They tried to get the band back together and make a comic named Funny Man, which was like a kind of comedian. I don't know. I like can't get into Funny Man, but I've tried, but it didn't work.
Yeah, Funny Man wears a kind of clownish outfit and catches criminals with juggling pins or an exploding cigar. He really isn't going anywhere. And to make things worse, Superman is more popular than ever. Columbia has just announced a 15-part movie serial, movies that Siegel and Shuster won't play a part in and won't get paid a dime for. Then, a finger on his shoulder. He snaps out of his reverie and turns around. There, in a ball gown, looking like a movie star, is Yolande Kovach, Lois Lane. Only now she's going by Joanne Carter. Carter isn't here by accident. Joe brought her. They dated in high school, remember, and had never fully lost touch. But now, she's smiling at Jerry. And that's it.
She comes with Joe and leaves with Jerry.
Jerry and Joanne date and then marry. And Jerry and Joe Shuster drift apart. Maybe it's romantic betrayal. Maybe it's all the stress over Superman. Maybe it's something else. But for a while, they aren't really friends. And then things go from bad to worse. For the next 20 years, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster live in relative obscurity. They both try to make it in comics, but eventually they both have to get other jobs. Jerry moves to California in the late 60s and works at the California Utilities Commission. Joe works as a cashier and a stock boy in New York. They're barely making ends meet. It's a dark time. And then Yolande Kovach aka Joanne Carter, now Joanne Siegel, also aka the inspiration for Lois Lane. She does something very, very Lois Lane-like.
When they're like kind of giving up, she does not give up.
Instead, she picks up the phone.
And she calls DC.
National is DC Comics now. And Joanne asks them, point blank, how it would look if the creator of Superman died of starvation. Her bluntness seems to get the job done. A few weeks later, a man shows up at the Siegel house and hands Joanne a check for $50. So she calls again. Soon, the Siegels are getting $100 a week. Joanne feels like she's really figured something out. So once again, she picks up the phone. This time, she calls Joe and tells him to get on the phone with DC himself to fight for his money. Somehow, in that moment, it's like no time has passed at all. The three of them, they're friends again. They're in this together. What the Siegels and Shuster don't know is that DC has a movie in the works, a big one. So they don't want any bad press right now from Superman's creators. The film is announced in 1978 in Variety. It's going to star Marlon Brando.
And Jerry Siegel is working as a file clerk, just living paycheck to paycheck. And he reads that. And then it says what Marlon Brando is going to be paid. And it is a lot of money. And Jerry loses his mind.
Brando is set to make more than $3.7 million to play Superman's father. Siegel decides to do what he does best. He sits down and he writes. Not a comic this time, a press release. Sort of a press release / curse. Here's what he says. Why am I putting this curse on a movie based on my creation, Superman? Because cartoonist Joe Shuster and I, who co-originated Superman together, will not get 1 cent from the Superman super movie deal. Jerry sends this letter to every news outlet he can think of. One picks it up, and then another. And then it's everywhere. It catches the attention of someone important, another comic book artist named Neal Adams, famous for his depictions of Batman and the Green Lantern.
Neal Adams, who was the biggest comic book artist at the time, an all-time great, heard this story and said, we're going to have a press conference.
Siegel and Shuster give their permission, and Adams shares their story. Two great artists getting nothing from their creation, while DC gets rich.
This is the 70s, and this is the era of inflation and evil corporations. And Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster all of a sudden are the poster boys for the fight against that.
Siegel and Shuster get booked on talk shows, on late night. People love their story. And the public pressure on DC starts to build, which is lucky for Siegel and Shuster because they've already lost this fight in court.
They have no legal leg to stand on. There's no reason for Warner Brothers, who owns DC, to give them money, but they have to because the public outcry is so great.
Neal Adams ends up on the phone with DC, and they start negotiating.
And they finally get a deal where they're going to get a stipend, they're going to get health insurance, they're going to pay to help Joe's eyes.
But Adams isn't done.
He said, I want one more thing.
The Superman movie comes out in December 1978. It stars Brando, Christopher Reeve, Margot Kidder, and Gene Hackman.
When it begins, it says, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.
This was Adam's surprise.
He was the one who made sure that that would be on every property going forward.
After decades of fighting, Siegel and Shuster are getting paid and they're getting credit for what they created. Old wounds die hard, and this doesn't fix everything.
They were still like who they were. Jerry would see a Superman movie and like, oh, that's great, but I could write, a better one.
Still, in their later years, they seem happy. They're surrounded by friends and family.
They lived right around the corner from each other, just like they did when they were kids.
Joe Shuster dies in 1992. Jerry Siegel follows 4 years later. Then Joanne Siegel in 2011. After their deaths, their families keep on fighting for ownership of Superman. Because Superman is still famous. He still means something. Born out of pain and chaos, the Depression, Siegel's father's death, World War II, high school, Superman offers hope. Hope that we can be saved, that good will triumph, and that someday we'll get the chance to be like Clark Kent, taking off his glasses and putting on his cape. We'll finally be seen for who we really are, not who we appear to be. Thanks for listening to History This Week, a Back Pocket Studios production in partnership with the History Channel. To stay updated on all things History This Week, sign up at historythisweekpodcast.com. And if you have any thoughts or questions, send us an email at historythisweek@history.com. Special thanks to our guest, Brad Ricca, author of Superboys, The Amazing Adventures of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the creators of Superman. His newest book is Lincoln's Ghost. This episode was produced by Kathryn Isaac. It was sound designed by Dan Rosado and also produced by me, Sally Helm. For Back Pocket Studios, our executive producer is Ben Dickstein. From the History Channel, our executive producers are Eli Lehrer and Liv Fiddler. Don't forget to follow, rate, and review History This Week wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next week.